Hey guys, just want to do another quick video for you, maybe try to get some discussion to go on. As you play these projects, have you ever thought about the statistics that are really hard to get right? I mean, the truth is that there are some stats that are actually not that hard to get right when we're talking about how batters hit, for example. We talk about things such as, modeling the right number of extra base hits, getting the right slugging percentage, even having pitchers give up the right numbers of hits and things like that. This all seems like something that's pretty basic. It's been done before. There are different sort of ways that you can approach the problem, but it's not something that's completely inconceivable. There are some things, though, that I think that are a little bit more difficult to get right, in part because they're rare and in part because they involve a lot of different movement. So things like, say, batters hit by a pitch or wild pitches or pass balls, for example, are kind of tricky. The wild pitch pass ball determination can only happen with a runner on base, and in part has got to depend upon the ability of your catcher and the ability of your pitcher, because naturally a catcher who's a good catcher can, at least in theory, prevent what otherwise would be a wild pitch from being a wild pitch. And a catcher who's particularly poor might miss a good pitch and end up leading to a pass ball or even to a wild pitch, depending upon how it's being scored. As I have said on my blog and will say again in the future, a lot of these statistics that are sort of based upon how the official scorer feels about what happens are a little bit difficult for us to replicate, and they're kind of hard to deal with when it comes to figuring out how significant they really are. There are other things, though, that are a little bit harder to get just right. And we're talking about stuff like caught stealing. That can be a statistic that can be very, very difficult to get right. In fact, I know from looking into sabermetrics these days that it's difficult for those who worship at the altar of WAR to understand exactly what impact catchers have and what comes from the other players. If you spend a lot of time over on Baseball Savant and you watch the replays they have for caught stealing plays for their catcher caught stealing above average or whatever they're calling it, well, you'll notice if you watch a whole bunch of these is that a certain number of things have to go exactly right. Right, for a runner to be caught stealing, the runner's got to move. The batter's got to take the pitch. Right, if one of those things don't happen, you won't have a caught stealing. The catcher has to receive a pitch that is in a place where he can deal with it. In other words, he has to have called for the right pitch beforehand. If you're calling breaking balls in the dirt, the guy's going to steal all over you, obviously. And he has to be able to receive the ball from the pitcher in a place that allows him to throw it, right? He could be crossed up, but he can't be totally crossed up. There was a play that I watched in which the catcher called for the ball in the outside corner, and the pitcher missed it totally and threw over the plate into the inside corner. Was lucky that the batter didn't swing. It was called a strike. Technically, what the algorithm picked up was the fact that the ball crossed the plate, and they said, oh, well, the catcher should have done a good job, fielding this and throwing, but he couldn't because he was crossed up. He had to reach all the way across his body to grab it and was in no position to transfer the ball and to throw over to get the runner. Right? Things like that need to happen right for a caught stealing. And then, of course, you have to make sure that whichever fielder it is, the shortstop or the second baseman, that they're communicating right and that they're in the right place, not standing on the bag, but just right in front of the bag so that that throw can get in and get the runner right before the tag is made. How do you go about measuring and emulating that sort of thing in a baseball game, right? It's very, very difficult. What about something even more simple, like a bunt, right? We know a lot about hits. We know a lot about the way that people normally hit, and we know a little bit about sacrifice bunts, but what about bunts that turn into base hits? What about bunts that are unsuccessful that turn into strikeouts, or bunts where we missed it and it was a strike, or even if the pitch was a ball and he decided not to bunt again, right? Where does all of that go? That's got to go somewhere in your determination as to what happens with the bunt, but how do you account for it, right? That's another thing that can be very, very difficult to get exactly right. Another thing that I've talked about a lot recently is double plays, right? So double plays you would think is not that hard to get right, except that it's not entirely clear who is the most responsible for these double plays, right? You have to have infielders who play well. They have to be able to turn it, but the ball has to be hit quickly enough. And in theory, in some people's theory, you have to have the right kind of pitcher on the mound who can throw a double play. Whether that actually happens or not is a huge, huge bit of debate. The general trend these days is to simply concede everything to fielding independent pitching and to forget about anything even remotely resembling pitchers having any sort of influence over where the ball is hit. Now, I would tell you that I think that most prior baseball players, former professional players, and former amateur players as well will tell you that that's not true, that pitchers do have some influence over where the ball is hit. but it can be a very, very complicated thing. It really is a complicated game when you get down to it. And we're not even talking about stuff like weather effects that haven't really been studied that well because weather changes during the course of a game. Ballpark effects, something that is studied, but is studied in a very sort of rigid cardboard fashion that is not very responsive to weird things that happen. And era effects, which are things that are probably exaggerated in the way that we study the game. There are a lot of other things that go on that can be very, very difficult to sort of fit into your game. Usually when you see people who create baseball games that have ballpark effects or weather effects, what you're actually seeing is like a simulation of those effects, right? You're seeing something that maybe will change things a little bit, but won't make a huge change because the game has to continue to be realistic. If it were to make a huge change and you happen to have a really cold April or a really warm April, that might skew your stats completely, and so we can't let that happen. The same is true for ballpark effects, which tend to be very cosmetic when you start digging into it, because if you allow it to sort of take over your game, weird things will happen. Even pitcher fatigue has the same sort of thing going on. I've been reading this thread here on Tabletop Sports, and we have the creator of Season Ticket Baseball who came on here and who talked about trying to get statistical accuracy for things like pitcher fatigue or for wind. But he mentions on here that you have to make sure that whatever effect you create has a counter effect that is also felt so that you don't skew your statistics. We'll talk more in the future about trying to stay away from skewing these statistics, but it really is a major thing. And this is a thing not only that people who play simulations tend to miss, this is the sort of thing that people who do research into WAR and into advanced sabermetrics also tend to miss. Because you get so excited about the trees that you're looking at that you forget to take a step back and see where it fits into the forest. More on that later. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about those statistics that games really have a hard time getting right. Talk to you later. Bye.